Today, I am super excited about because it marks the beginning of our embarking into a kind of different territory than we've been in so far, which is the realm of more social, cultural, political, etc. Like we're moving into the stuff that is less directly pharmacological and more niche, more like really getting into the underbelly of things, which I know some of you who are here are like, yes, this is what I'm here for. Um, so this is not going to be the most culturally intensive portion that we're going to look at. However, I do want to take a little bit of a dive into some topics that are a little off the beaten path today. Maybe take a look at some substances or some traditions that you guys might not be familiar. Sorry, I did not upload Tuesday's video. That was totally my bad. We finished medications and that was it. Yes, so this is a fresh lecture today. So real quick recap from last time, what are some potential reasons why SSRIs might have a delayed time to action? Why could it take them 4 to 6 weeks to start working for people?
Could it be due to like just I mean, I know it just takes that amount of time to build up in the brain, but in that way as well, uh, if it's only blocking reuptake, it might take a certain amount of time for more serotonin to build up.
Well, since we don't really fully understand the mechanism, maybe that could be a part of it. You're on the right track. What one of the major theories is right now is that over time, because SSRIs block the transporter from sucking up excess serotonin in the synapse, that over time your brain starts making fewer transporters naturally. So that it basically is like a natural SSRI. I finally discovered a source for symmetry. What does that mean, Charles? What does symmetry mean? Um, yeah, so that's one theory. Has to do with fewer reuptake transporters being made through time. I can't tell you why Thomas the Train is the graphic that I just noticed that Thomas the Train is what I chose as like the representation of fewer reuptake transporters. Does it have to do with transport, maybe? I'm not sure. I would have to ask myself in 2018. And then I'm just going to push us through this then. Another reason is potentially reducing inflammation over time because inflammation is implicated as being a potential problem in several disorders and diseases and psychological conditions, and also growth of new neurons that are specifically allocated towards problem solving and redirecting maladaptive thought patterns, etc. Symmetry, a little known salvia analog, salvinorin B ethoxymethyl ether. The most potent psychedelic by dose. Okay, but if it's a salvia derivative, is it the most potent psychedelic by dose or the most potent hallucinogenic deliriant by dose? That's what I want to know. Something tells me that an extremely potent salvia analog is not going to be a traditional psychedelic experience and will possibly be closer to like, okay, yes, semantics, but no semantics, because an experience on like 800 mics of LSD is going to be a very different experience than Salvia divinorum, right? Like I've mentioned this before, the number of 13-year-olds that I've known who have been like, I want to try drugs, and they've smoked salvia and been like, I'm never doing drugs again. Sub 10 mics, that's wild. Three major categories of psychotropic medications include anesthetics, analgesics, and mental health medications. So, putting you to sleep, relieving your pain, treating your brain. General categories, obviously, there's way more to it than that. We don't have the ability to get into the super specifics in this class, unfortunately. What is one substance that is an extremely dangerous interaction with MDMA? MAOI, that's right. Benzos. Oh, lithium. Wow, you guys really have like a lot of that unexpected suggestions for that. So MAOI was the one that I'm going for because MAOI, nice job. MAOI is a serotonin in no, that's not what I was going to say. MAOI inhibits the effectiveness of MAO, which cleans up excess serotonin. So if you have a lot of serotonin and nothing to clean it up, then you're at real risk of serotonin syndrome, like really serious serotonin syndrome. Benzos and MDMA I actually can't really think of a reason why benzos and MDMA would necessarily pose a significant interaction. I guess I've never really thought about it because I don't really know anyone that mixes benzos with MDMA except on the come down, which is really common. It's very, very common for people to like pop a Klonopin on the come down of MDMA. And I'll come back to that in a second, Jared. And then Hunter, lithium. Yeah, I mean, lithium's probably going to pose a serious interaction with MDMA. Again, not what I was going for, but lithium, some of you might have seen the Instagram story yesterday on DanceSafe's page. Lithium is like really notorious for mixing with psychedelics, in particular classical psychedelics, just in general is a no-go with lithium because your risk of psychosis and of seizure is just like really, really high. I'm not going to pretend to know exactly why that's the case. You know, lithium is an NMDA receptor antagonist, which is the same class as dissociatives, technically speaking, which is bizarre, right? That like lithium in that case would have such a strange interaction with psychedelics. So that is science that is beyond me and possibly beyond our community at this point in time. I've done a lot of digging. There is not much literature published on that one, just a lot of anecdotal reports. And I would generally say that it's probably not a good idea to mix lithium with anything that has the potential to lower your seizure threshold, which MDMA can, or uh, to mix with anything that has the potential to be like really, I don't want to say stimulating necessarily, but um, keep in mind that like mania and psychosis, a lot of connections are being made very rapidly in the brain. So anything that enhances that process could potentially act as a trigger and a stressor. Jared says, quick note from last class, I found a claim on the methylphenidate Wikipedia page that ADHD medications do induce dopamine neuron growth and sensitivity, potentially correcting the dopamine deficiency seen in people with ADHD. That would totally make sense to me. That would totally make sense to me. I would need to look into the literature a bit more, but like that absolutely checks out. And Charles, thank you for sharing about Salvinorin B. I will check those out at the end. Next one. Okay. What two substances can cause fatal withdrawals or are like pretty known for being able to cause fatal withdrawals? Right? Jackson, alcohol, and benzos. I like benzies though. That's very endearing. Depressants. If you take the pressure off of the spring, you are at serious risk of excitotoxicity and seizures and potentially coma, arrhythmia, whatever. Yeah, GABA agonists. GABA agonists are the class of depressants. And which substance requires the presence, there's so much on my screen that you can't see, requires the presence of an MAOI in order to work orally. Yes, that's right, Hunter. DMT. That is why ayahuasca requires multiple different kinds of plant components to it, because otherwise DMT, poor DMT, will just get bullied in your intestines. So if you want to ingest it orally, or really if you want to smoke it and have it last longer than like 5 minutes, because DMT, let me tell you guys, DMT does not last very long. It is literally like a 5-minute experience. I would say that if you're like really on a good one, you can stretch it to 10, but I have never seen anyone have a DMT experience longer than like at most 10 to 12 minutes. Like any report saying 15 to 20 is like, I'd be really surprised. It's possible, I'm sure, but I just haven't really seen it. Real quick, this substance is an MAOI containing plant. What is it called? It starts with an S. Does anyone remember? I'd be very impressed if anyone remembered this one. Yes, Syrian rue. Right on. Nice. Excellent. Yeah. Syrian rue has a naturally occurring MAOI. It is one thing that can potentially be combined with DMT. What are these called? Snorting devices. Poo nannies. Yeah, tutors. That's right. Heard that Adam from Psych Substance, yeah, had a 40-minute DMT trip on MDMA. Wow. That's really interesting. However, I think that that also is just kind of a product of mixing substances. Like I know that mixing, for instance, edibles with nitrous, like you're high on nitrous for like 10 minutes at a time. It's crazy. So I would be very unsurprised if there's just like some compounding, like perceptual thing that happens, honestly. That's a tutor, a snorting device that is used often hopefully personal, so you don't have to share with other people. And then pruritus, skin picking and itching. I need to take this out of here so it's not like always in here. Okay, today and next time, there's so much to go over in this one. I keep finding things I want to add to it, so it's just going to get longer and longer and longer. Um, we're going to be taking the first dive into the history of psychedelics. And if any of you are like me, there's a part of you that hears the word history and you're like, oh God, like I'm not down for history right now. Like, who failed A push? I failed APUSH. I actually didn't fail it. I got a 3 on the AP exam. I think I got a 2 on AP Gov or something like that. My parents were really not happy with me. So, indigenous and historical uses we will be looking at, and we'll also look at famous figures and literature, cultural shifts that have happened over time, music and arts, and eventually cults. And all of these things are wrapped into this big, bubbly package of psychedelic history. Now, psychedelic history is not like other kinds of history because it gets weird. Like, it is in so many corners of the world and has influenced so many things, but like not in that hand wavy, like this person was born in 1872. Like, this is shit that touches all kinds of different areas in really bizarre ways. So there are three waves that are referred to in terms of psychedelic usage and psychedelic percolation through society. The first wave involves so-called shamanism. We're going to talk about shamanism and plastic shamanism and like the ethical and moral considerations of what a shaman actually is, and the fact that the word shaman is actually just kind of like a whitewashed attempt to package this very complicated and individual subject. Indigenous usage, which again, like the word indigenous in and of itself is kind of like an issue because it simplifies all people who have been colonized as being indigenous when these are like very distinct cultures with very unique methodologies, very unique histories and politics and like social structures. So be mindful when using words like shaman or indigenous or native peoples, because it really is like an insinuation of like, oh, these poor people that have like such primitive ways, which is a really colonial attitude. So when you're specifically referring to like a culture, a peoples that uses a specific drug, refer to them as they are, you know, like refer to their culture, refer to their people. Don't just say like this indigenous, you know, general blanket statement. And theogenic practices, rituals. This is basically like the more ritualistic, like naturally harvested kind of deal. And then the second wave was really the resurgence of counterculture in the 60s and through the 20th century, which was where people started flocking to this idea of being anti-establishment, which came after the Vietnam War in particular, and World War II. After World War II, that's when that started. And then the third wave is now. And in fact, there's a website called thethirdwave.co, which is interesting. It has a lot of guides on microdosing and volumetric dilution and stuff, which is a way of dosing out very small quantities of things. 3 is not bad. What do you mean 3 is not bad? Oh, on the AP exam. No, it's not bad. It's not bad. I remembered that I did much more poorly on it than I thought. I think that was like an accident. And so the third wave is kind of like where we're at right now in terms of how people have started to conceptualize psychedelic usage differently than they were in the second wave and the first wave. Like, there is kind of a technocratic way that society is looking at psychedelics right now. Like, people are eyeing them from a capitalist standpoint, eyeing them from a personal development standpoint that is largely also rooted in capitalism, like success-oriented psychedelic uses. Um, and also, there's this really strange and complicated relationship that has arisen between the fact that many people are seeking a pilgrimage, are seeking the culture that they do not have. Like, in a deeply capitalist, deeply concrete jungle country like the United States is in like most urban areas, obviously, aside from reservations and other places where there's a lot of like, not to use the blanket statement, but like a lot of native populations that are not quite as entrenched in this like deeply like materialistic industrial thing. People are feeling starved of culture and in the typical colonial fashion are seeking that of others to fill that void, to get in touch with nature, even if it requires thousands of dollars. So these are the kinds of concerns that we're going to be talking about. As a white person who comes from an affluent and privileged background, this is all signal boosting. Like, I'm more than happy to refer to specific organizations run by like specific local leaders that you can support and that you can reach out to about these things. There's a lot of them. Yeah, we'll talk about psychedelic exceptionalism too. That's a can of worms. So there have been reported usage of psychedelics forever, like 9,000 BCE in Africa. There are cave drawings, archaeological digs in Bolivia showing tools for ingesting substances, more mushroom carvings. My colleague Mitchell, who is the executive director of Dance Safe, collects pre-Columbian artifacts depicting drug use, depicting mushrooms in particular. He has like a whole collection. Of like turn on his camera in a meeting and be like, check out this guy. Like, people said that it was like a knife. Look, it's clearly a mushroom. Like, historians refuse to acknowledge the presence of drugs in those carvings, which is kind of funny. So one thing that we're going to take a look at a couple of different like naturally occurring hallucinogens just to get a good idea of what isn't in the mainstream eye right now. Although knowing this crew that's in here right now is, yeah, executive dancer, that's fun. Knowing this crew that's in here right now, I would wager that a pretty good number of you are already familiar with this toad. In fact, let's go ahead and get a thumbs up if you have laid eyes on our friend the toad before, or if you're familiar with what we're about to look at. Okay. Yep, I figured that there would be a good number of you. So this is Bufo alvarius. And for those of you that love Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, there's an amazing series on this guy. So much to learn about Bufo. Bufo is predominantly found in the American Southwest, although it can be found in other places as well. And it produces in its little cheek sacs 5-MeO-DMT. Now, don't be fooled. 5-MeO-DMT is not DMT. It is a different experience. 5-MeO-DMT is kind of considered to be, aside from ibogaine, like the holy grail of extremely fucking intense psychedelic experiences. But it's also very, very unique from DMT and its presence. DMT is very much an experience of like blasting off into another realm, meeting entities, having these otherworldly experiences like that are full of a lot of meaning, etc. 5-MeO-DMT, or 5-space as people call it, is like a complete disintegration. It is a complete absence of self and identity. It is a negative space experience. And it can have some very traditional psychedelic components to it, but 5 is not a pleasant experience for most people. It's a very profound experience for most people. It's a very significant experience. But one of the major things that we'll see here is that this concept of discomfort is deeply discredited in Western medicine. The value of being uncomfortable is very much not a part of what we would consider to be our self-care rituals in America, in particular, in Western culture. And being uncomfortable is a hallmark of a lot of naturally occurring hallucinogens. Now, what's interesting about Bufo is that there isn't actually very much dated history of people using this until the 20th century. Like, Bufo wasn't really on the radar until relatively recently, I would say. And oh yeah, so for those of you that have not seen it, we're going to take a quick trip into Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. Thank you for everyone who's ever let me log into their Hulu account. So, an important thing to note about 5, it is no fucking joke. This is not something that you do with your pals in your house. Like, you really need to be with people that know about 5. In fact, I have spoken with someone in the past who's had plenty of experiences on 5, who has their own Bufo toads in a cage in their room, who has told me I would not give anyone 5 unless I'd spent 6 months sitting with them, preparing them for it. And even then, I'm not qualified. And this is one of the most qualified people I've ever encountered about substances. So that should really give you a measure of how seriously you should take this if you're looking at doing so. Ibogaine, we are not going to be, or no, we haven't really gone into Ibogaine. We will come back to it though. Not in this lecture, but a little bit later. Right to comfort is a component of white supremacy culture. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That is a really important point that we'll be talking about in terms of white people feeling threatened by being uncomfortable during conversations about racism and stuff like that. So we'll be talking about that as well. Um, and yes, in terms of five, I I would say DMT is like you can kind of like chief it in a vape pen in your bedroom and vibe out to some Closey or whatever. That's not anecdotal, but with 5, I would not recommend trying to do so. And part of that is because 5, when you actually blast off on 5, which is like different than just smoking small quantities of it, obviously, people react to it very differently. And this is a really famous clip from Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, best. And it shows 3 people having very, very different reactions to 5. I want to watch that whole episode. So yeah, interesting commentary in the chat about Hamilton, or not about Hamilton, about doing this near a river. Yes, that is a major criticism of that ceremony that has been had by some, like, why would you do that? There are people that are falling face first into the water, and they're like, it does not need to be right on the edge of the water. Like, there have been a lot of criticisms of that, a lot of criticisms of standing up during that. Generally, if it's your first time doing a drug, sit your ass down, no matter what the drug is. Like, especially if you have untested cocaine or something, if you overdose on fentanyl doing a line of cocaine that you have never done before, you will probably be better off if you're sitting down than standing up. Just saying. So, in terms of fully preparing yourself for it, as with any intense psychedelic experience, you have to be willing to be unprepared. You have to be willing to be completely disassembled, to be thrown off. You have to consent to the risk. But you need to understand that something that is as powerful as 5 or iboga, either way, you need to be able to consent to potentially having some really profound changes in the way that you experience yourself and the world around you. Um, yeah, not everyone wants that risk. And what risk means really depends on a lot of factors. It's funny, Charles, that you say that it makes your entire body cringe. When Hamilton does it and his eyes roll back, I get chills. I'm just like, oh my God, I love drugs. Like, this is just the coolest possible area to work in. Like, guys, you have no idea. Like, man, it's so cool. Like, I could eat this shit up all day. Yes, the Martin Ball controversy is enormous. There's a video of him telling a group of people that I think it's like a training of some kind. He's like, yeah, I like sometimes I will literally throw up on someone's face when they're on 5 because it's what they need. Like, it feels so natural. Sometimes I'll just like lick them or something like that. And there's a huge wave of fury coming out about that. And Symposia did a really big expose on it. It's a mess right now. It's a mess. There's actually a pretty high incidence rate right now of practitioners being abusive during ceremonies and taking advantage of vulnerable altered states, which is just another reason why, if we don't have regulated practice, then people are at serious risk of having serious psychological or physical or sexual harm. Yeah, about Hamilton looking out like a waifu. There is the Hamilton episode where he goes to Mexico and is trying to find where they grow the mushrooms. He's like, so I went outside this bar and I asked this guy if he knew where I could find mushrooms. And he said no, but his friend was a painter and he painted under the influence of mushrooms. So I went and met with the painter. And then it cuts to Hamilton standing in front of the painting. And he says in like the most Hamilton, like robotic voice, like, I forget exactly how you say it, but he was like, are there mushrooms in the eyes? Like, how do you say mushroom in Spanish? Oh, I'm sure someone knows. Yeah. He'll be like, I hongos en el ojo. And the guy was like, sí. And Hamilton just goes, me gusta. Like, just like that. And that's all you see of this interaction. It's like the most Hamilton, like flat-footed, like white guy going to Mexico to look for mushrooms. It's really funny. I think it's really funny. Okay, so hallucinogenic fish, another Hamilton special. This is the Sarpa salpa fish, which is found all over in the eastern seaboard. We don't exactly know what makes the Sarpa salpa hallucinogenic. However, we believe that it's the product of a toxin in algae, potentially. And this was a kind of fish that was used recreationally by the Roman Empire and Polynesians. And it was known as the fish of dreams in Arabic, is what it translates to. There are quite a few like this. So Hamilton, our faithful man who has ingested every possible psychoactive substance and documented it in this video that is 4 minutes and 20 seconds long, has done us a favor. He's eating fish heads.
Should I just keep eating fish heads? Should I have a 5th fish head?
Quand tu arrives aux États-Unis, tu rapportes à ta mère si ta mère est encore là. T'as mangé combien de têtes?
Les frissons vont venir et après tu vas se habituer à les frissons.
What a guy, for real. So I'm not even, every time I teach this course, I try and pronounce this just because I think it's funny. Ichthyoalliinotoxism. It's a delirium state produced by hallucinogenic fish intoxication. It's a toxic state, you know, like these are not traditional psychedelics by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, that's good to know, Jared. Hamilton had heard that the effects can be minor, so he made an effort to take a lot. Yeah, that word, that's just one of those things where, you know, where are you going to hear someone say it? And how are you going to type in the keywords? How are you going to do it? I dare you to find out. Then we have the Apis dorsata, which is a giant honeybee found in the mountains of Nepal and Turkey that has been used by the Gurung people as a very culturally significant icon, basically, but it's not actually the bee itself that produces these hallucinogenic effects. It's the honey, specifically the Rhododendron ponticum, which is a honey that is that produces this gyanotoxin. And the gyanotoxin is what makes it an intoxicating honey. So the honeybees pick up this intoxicating gyanotoxin-laden honey, and then they create their hives in these remarkable bee things. And there's an entire cultural practice around actually going down and harvesting this honey from these very dangerous cliff scales. And Vice is the only crew that is dumb enough to go everywhere and do all the drugs. So we're going to visit them once more to see exactly how this happens. This is a great little mini doc, by the way. To be clear, I would use sources other than Vice if it weren't for the fact that Vice is so good at what they do. Like, this stuff is really insider information that Vice somehow manages to get its hands on.
All right, we can try some of this?
So they scale down.
All right, so we're eating the wax here.
These huge, huge ladders descending into these massive cliff sides.
That's really sweet and tasty.
It's very dangerous work. It's a very social endeavor.
Is that too much? Not too much? No. I'll eat a little more. I don't want to go over the recommended dosage, because that's the difference between just getting high and getting sick. I'm just gonna eat another little wet corner of this, and that's it for now. And I'll wait a little bit, maybe have a little more.
Yes, this is mad honey. That's mad honey.
One more? Yeah. All right, cool. Let's do it. Drip into my mouth.
It feels sticky. Just like watching it.
It tastes like strong. You know, store-bought honey, it's sweet, but it doesn't have like that deep sort of like kind of a smoky flavor to it almost. And like burns your throat a little bit on the way down, but it feels good. It feels like medicine. I'm starting to feel a little bit of something. It feels like I just took like a couple of hits of the joint. It's not super strong. It's not like knocking me out. I just feel like a little buzz, you know? And it's like, it's funny, as I'm like talking, it's actually getting like a little bit stronger. Durga is definitely kind of stoned as well. Like you can tell, like he was just giggling and stuff. It's really a unique thing to this place and to these people, and they're loving it. And it's just honey that like you get from a cliff. And I'll start that over. It's just honey that like you get from a cliff and you eat it and you get stoned. It's crazy. You guys gotta try some of this shit.
So a really interesting like continuous theme that we're going to see throughout all of these cultures and these substances is that a lot of the time these hallucinogenic plants were used explicitly for medicinal purposes. And what medicinal means is very different than what we in Western medicine would decide is medicinal. This very much, I think, comes from a more holistic approach of being like what medicine is something that benefits you as a culture, as an individual, as a community, regardless of what that looks like. And that's part of why we have this like really shitty, very restrictive definition of what is medicinal in the United States, in North America, because we do not attribute any value to getting high on honey on a cliff with your family, friends, whatever. Like there is, but also this is considered to be used for medicinal purposes, like actual physical medicinal purposes. And that's the thing is like, why would we have extensive studies on the validity of those medicinal purposes? No one's going to make any money off of them, largely. Like there just isn't enough interest because granotoxin is also a toxin, you know? So that's part of the reason we just don't have a lot of studies. Oops, I didn't do that correctly. Yeah, there are a lot of conflicting reports about mad honey. It can make you very sick. If you eat too much of it, you'll get sick as fuck. So let's take a look at Yopo. Yopo is the seeds, the pods, etc., of this tree in the Amazon basin, and it contains bufotinin, bufotine. I'm gonna settle on one of them for now. It just like crushes me to have all these pronunciation uncertainties because they fall into, like I've said, they fall into the categories of words that you hear pronounced out loud once at a conference, and then why would you have any reason to hear them pronounced out loud in the next 6 months or so? Bufotinin, that's what I was under the impression of as well. I tried to check myself earlier and got confused. Yeah, bufotinin is the predominant psychoactive component of Yopo. There are trace quantities of both DMT and 5-MeO-DMT in this plant, and that's fucking cool, right? Like we have seed pods. They only contain like a fraction of a percentage of DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, but these seed pods make these chemicals, these very profoundly potent psychoactive chemicals. It's really bizarre, isn't it? Now, Yopo is found largely in the Caribbean and in the northern portions of South America, although it's all over South America as well. And it has frequently been used ceremonially, used with snorting tubes. And snorting tubes are an interesting one. So I want you to see one in action. This person went to visit his Yanomami family in the Amazon basin, who encouraged him to use Yopo with them. So you put the tapered end of the tube in your nose, and there's a little bit of snuff, and the person on the other end blows it into it. So it's not the same. There's actually a person on the other end of it. It really hurts. There's, I believe it's his brother who is right there. There's the other end of the tube. Now, having something blown into your nose is actually reported to be quite a bit more comfortable and effective than snorting something yourself because of the force of it just shooting right back there.
Hello.
The rest of this, he talks about the experience with it.
when they started chirping, there was these long sustained tweets that were just carried out and resonated through the forest, and you really felt like, you know, you're part of this sort of flow of the rainforest. I felt like it's like you are still in the forest, but you're seeing it through a different lens. You're now seeing it through the lens of the hekura, or the spirits, where, you know, the trees and the leaves are have a soul, have a spirit. And thinking back on this, it made me think that, you know, when the Yanomami in their spirituality and their animism is so closely linked, intimately linked with their environment. Anything from the chants, the mythologies, death and disease and growth and birth is all related to the environment and their ecosystem. And the Amazon essentially is their place of worship.
Again, a really interesting video about this one. In response to the thing about DMT being produced in the brain, yes, the brain, yes, I think the pineal gland, unfortunately, the Wooks have so much ammunition with that now, does indeed produce endogenous DMT, means DMT made in the body. However, the amount of DMT that is actually secreted is way below what would be required to have an actual psychoactive effect. So yes, it does appear to be the case that we produce it endogenously. However, the research on this is still inconclusive. It is still, I believe, largely theoretical. And this idea about DMT being secreted when we die, again, is like still very much a theoretical thing. There is no solid backing either way on this one at this point in time. People are still looking, but we don't have firm answers on that. And a lot of people have kind of jumped on that and been like, DMT is released when we dream and when we die, it's crazy. But it's like, it's such tiny quantities if it's the case that there would be no actual hallucinogenic effect. Produced by the same body part which produces melatonin and another tryptamine and does it at sub-perceptual doses. Yeah, it's just like it's a complicated system, and it's too simplistic to say, oh, the brain makes this, just like it's too simplistic to say, oh, Yopo makes DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. Like, it's not accurate to say, oh, Yopo is a DMT hallucinogen because it doesn't actually produce DMT-like effects, because there's just not enough of it. So just because it's there doesn't mean that it has any kind of significant impact on functionality. Yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of different snorting devices that are used for this. There's the Caripe, which is for self-administration. I'll show you how that works in a second. And in the Caribbean, there's the Cajoba, which is a ceremonial snorting pipe. And you'll see that there are, like, a lot of cultures are very fond of snuffs, and also of venoms and toxins. So one thing that we're not going to talk about is Cambo, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, which is basically you scrape frog secretions from their little armpits, and then you stick it into wounds on your skin. You burn the skin and put the poison on them, and it makes people purge and feel really shitty and then feel like very freed and cleansed. But Cambo can be kind of dangerous to administer without proper guidance. So don't try and self-administer Cambo if you don't know anything about it. And then there are like lots of other snuffs like Hape, and lots of ways to administer them, and the names of the snorting devices vary from region to region. So something like Hape is like a tobacco snuff, basically, that produces this like very intense, like, again, it's a cleansing ritual for many cultures. Now here is Caripe.
Oh, sure. That's happy. Roasted.
You see that? He just put it in his mouth, put it in his nose, and self-administer it. You blow it right into your own nose. Imagine if people were doing that with their Coke in the 80s. See people in the club like blowing their own Coke into their face. That's it on that one. And then there's something like Changa, which is something that is like a more recent development. A lot of people think that Changa is kind of like ayahuasca and that it was brewed for hundreds of years and used in very particular contexts, but no, it's thought that Changa actually originated at Boomfest in the early 2000s, which I think is in Portugal. And there was just like someone that wanted to make their DMT experience more efficient. So they decided to combine a naturally occurring MAOI with a DMT containing plant BCAP is not a DMT. That's incorrect. That should not be there. So the idea of this is to extend the duration of the DMT experience when you smoke it. And then we have good old Salvia divinorum. And Salvia, of course, is just like, we've talked about Salvia a little bit in the past. It's a kappa opioid receptor agonist, which is a very strange thing for a psychedelic to do. But again, it has kind of interesting implications for what opioids are capable of and what the opioid system is capable of, especially considering that the nod state on opioids can be very hallucinogenic, can be like a dream state, a fever dream. Now, salvia, again, is very unpredictable and generally is not considered to be a particularly pleasant experience. However, it has pretty significant cultural background. It grows wild in Oaxaca, Mexico, which is also the birthplace of psilocybin, and it comes in extracts. And the thing about extracts is that when you extract the active component of salvia, the trips have the potential to be quite a lot crazier and more uncomfortable. It is more traditional to actually chew the leaves. And that is gross. Like chewing salvia leaves is a really, again, it's not a pleasant, comfortable experience, but it is a very different psychedelic experience than smoking salvia extract, which is a very westernized concept. Like salvia is not typically smoked in South America. It is chewed as something that grows naturally. Now, here is one of the best videos on YouTube. How many of you have seen Gardening on Salvia?
Hello, and welcome to Gardening on Salvia. I'm Eric, your host.
Hello.
Today we're going to learn how to plant a curry plant in our garden on Salvia. Now, I picked out a great spot in my garden, and what I want to do is I'm going to make a hole that's about 10 centimeters deep, about 5 centimeters on each side, and that plant's going to fit perfectly inside there. Once we have that in the ground, we're going to fill it in with some Miracle Grow, some soil from the garden itself, and we're going to water it, and then we're going to make sure that it's doing okay with a little bit of pH test that I'm going to show you how to do in a little bit. First, step one is we're going to smoke our salvia. Now, you want to hold that in until your vision begins to vibrate. And then we're going to go ahead and dig our hole. So I found a nice spot right here that I think I'm going to dig into. And we're just going to see how that goes. So I guess...
I'm not going to watch the whole thing because the entire rest of the video is just him on the ground, and then he just kind of...
When you're done with that, you can go ahead and get your plant in the ground.
And that's it. So obviously that's not the quintessential salvia experience from a traditional perspective. However, it is probably a good thing to note that smoking salvia... Oh yeah, Hamilton did interview this guy, and this guy basically was like, I feel terrible for contributing to the absolute demonization of salvia. Like these videos were actually shown in courtrooms while legislators attempted to make salvia illegal and criminalize it and be like, look what it does to people. So he felt really bad about it. He was like, I've been trying to undo the harm that I did with making this plant looks like nothing. But then also at the end of his interview with Hamilton, he's like, here, I'm going to teach you how to do this thing, and then smokes a bowl of salvia and does the same shit. So like, really, who knows exactly what this guy's in it for? Gardening on Benadryl. It sounds like just slow gardening, like really slow gardening. Now here's Datura, otherwise known as Jimson's weed and Hell's bells. Datura grows wild all over the country and all over South America, I believe in places as well. This is one that I would classify as being a dangerous substance. There aren't many that I'll put this label on. Datura is one that few people attempt and few people reattempt. This being said, as with many naturally occurring hallucinogens and deliriants, there is quite a bit of cultural value that has been had with Datura, with different populations of people all over the country, all over North and South America. So Datura has been used in various settings. Oftentimes the seeds are made into a salve or an ointment. I'm pretty sure that different parts of the flower have different levels of psychoactive potential. But even just like holding seed pods in your hand, like eating the seeds, making a salve out of them, like that is enough with Datura. The thing about it is it's not a hallucinogen in the traditional sense. It's very much a deliriant. It is like you are experiencing completely fabricated and very real realities that just blink and they're different. So you might be like, I'm in the shower in my house and my mom is knocking on the door. Blink, I'm in my room and I'm on the floor and there's like food all over me. Blink, I'm in my backyard and there are cigarettes all over the ground. That's actually a really common thing in reports about Datura is people that go around like trying to pick up cigarettes off the ground, which is an interesting continuous theme that's there. It is, oh yeah, people do put Datura in ayahuasca sometimes. It is not super common. And yeah, we are going to talk about scopolamine. Whoops. It's not, I would say that Datura isn't a super widely used one in ayahuasca. However, it's certainly possible. But yes, this is like a true hallucinogen in that you will literally fully hallucinate your reality. Proceed with extraordinary caution, if at all, to be honest. Even the most experienced psychonauts usually are like, okay, I would not do that again. Now looking at some more broad applications of these things. Aztec rituals were wild. They were parties. Like Aztec rituals threw down. They were really fond of morning glory, which is LSA. Morning glory seeds, you can buy them from Home Depot. And LSA is notorious for being a significantly less pleasant hallucinogen. It is not the same as LSD. Some people seek it out, assuming that it will be similar. It's not. LSA is notorious for being very physically uncomfortable and less visual. And then the use of peyote or mescaline-containing plants at some points in time. Datura, just because Datura can actually paralyze you, and this was sometimes done on purpose. And these were done for a couple of reasons: to treat and diagnose illnesses, to communicate with spirits, or just to have an absolute ball of a time. So, you know, it was pretty common for people to use drugs for recreational purposes. There is a ton of evidence of psychedelics being used in Aztec culture. They even had a word meaning to mushroom oneself. And the god of seven flowers is thought to potentially also be the god of hallucinogens as well. Now, looking at the history of mushrooms, Amanita muscarina is the quintessential red and white splotched mushroom that grows. Now, the history of Crimbus, right, the story of Santa Claus, involves obviously Santa going from house to house and putting shit in your stockings through your chimney and whatever. But an interesting origin story here was that, oh man, where was this? This was in, let me see. I gotta know where it was. Hang on. Hello. In Siberia. That's right. It's gonna drive me crazy. So in Siberia, it was actually fairly common for Amanita bartering to take place. And Amanita would grow at the base of pine trees, and the mushrooms were bartered via sleigh, and then you would hang them in your stockings to dry them out overnight. So we have this nice little Christmas origin story here of how the myth of Santa Claus originated, might have been partially based on this like genuine mushroom bartering at this period of time with the pine trees. And then you have the Illusionian Mysteries. And the Illusionian Mysteries were the story of Demeter and Persephone. Basically goes, they were the Greek gods, and Demeter was Persephone's mother. And Hades, the god of the underworld, stole Persephone and wanted to make her his bride and whatever. And Demeter was like, no, I control the seasons, and no. And Hades was like, yes, I control hell, and yes. So they struck a deal basically where they would split custody of this kid 50-50. So half of the year, Demeter would get her daughter Persephone up on the world's surface, and those are the summers and the springs because Demeter is happy. And then the other half of the year, Hades gets to keep Persephone, and Demeter is very sad. So we get fall and winter. So there used to be annual initiation ceremonies into the cult of Demeter and Persephone. And it was basically you would revere Persephone and hopefully you would get rewarded in the afterlife after that. So the Illusionian Mysteries were a series of ceremonies that took place over a course of days, and you would fast and celebrate. And then on the last day, or at the peak, not the last day, of the Illusionian Mysteries celebration, people would drink kykeon, which is a barley drink mix that we theorize to contain ergot fungus, which is the basis for creating psychedelics like LSD. And drinking kykeon brought on like revelatory spiritual experiences. It wasn't just like your average run-of-the-mill barley and wheat drink that you would drink to celebrate a Greek god, you know. The original forbidden fruit, that's really funny. Persephone ate a fruit that prevented her from leaving the underworld. Was that the middle part of the story that I left out? Sounds probably like it is. Now moving on to more modern times. I'm sure many of you are like, Alexander Shulgin. So in case you're not already familiar with the man, the myth, the legend, here's just like a couple of figures that you should know about before we start diving into the actual historical timeline of things. Shulgin is known as the godfather of psychedelics for a reason. There's him with wild-haired Hamilton. And Shulgin is also known as Sasha Shulgin or just Shulgin, Alexander Shulgin. And he was really like the man with the plan when it came to just synthesizing so many psychedelics. He was a major player in testing these substances on himself after synthesizing them with a group of people, generally people that he trusted, or just like by himself in some cases. And he had a lot of theories about like, oh, I'll change this group on this and it will create that. This ring is that. And he ultimately ended up, I forget what he died of, but it was maybe a decade ago. Was it less than a decade ago? But he has been followed by his wife, Anne, who was a therapist, I believe. And she is still alive and still speaks about her experiences with this. Yeah, Pikal is amazing. Pikal is amazing. Yeah, I don't remember what Shulgin died of. I do not know. It might have been old age. It very well might have. But he's an absolute legend. And he wrote Pikal and Tikal with his wife, Anne, which is phenethylamines I've known and loved, and tryptamines I've known and loved. And these are very, very extensive accounts of synthesizing so many psychedelic substances, I believe hundreds, as well as personal experiences with them, as well as an autobiography in the first part, which is so well written. Like, read the autobiography like a book in and of itself. It's amazing. It is so good. And then, of course, our other sweet man, Albert Hoffman, who looks adorable at like 100 years old before he died. He was the guy that synthesized LSD and then intentionally ingested 250 micrograms of it on Bicycle Day, which was April 19th, 1943. We're coming up on it. And Bicycle Day is now celebrated around the world by people doing acid together and sometimes going biking and sometimes just being on acid because they can. And he was also the first guy to synthesize psilocybin in a lab. So these are like the men that were like, oh, this is interesting. I can do this. And they were doing it at a time where it was really taboo. Like Shulgin's work, he couldn't really talk about it very openly with most people because there was just so much like mistrust around hallucinogens at that point in time because they were so off the map. Shulgin and Hoffman really helped put these drugs on the map of Western society. And he's so cute. He's like a little turtle. That's it for the day. We will come back on Tuesday and finish up talking about psychedelic culture. And then after that, let me see what is next real quick. I believe it is Counterculture. Yeah, we'll start going into specific counterculture communities, including I think the Beatniks and the Hells Angels and the Merry Pranksters and the Further Bus, but also counterculture communities that were like in different far-flung reaches. So I will see you guys on Tuesday. I'm gonna stop here and stick around to catch up on the chat, and have a great weekend.